introduction, Congressman, Mr. Mayor, other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming today. I know it's spring break. It's a great crowd for spring break. Thanks in particular for the young people to be with us. We've got a good intergenerational crowd, and I think that's appropriate given the subject. This is my first time in Grand Rapids. I've been in Michigan many times. I've been to all 50 states and about 100 countries during my lifetime. But Grand Rapids is rather relevant for me in my political history because I was born in the South and I was something called a Southern Democrat when there was something like that. That was called a conservative Democrat. And I changed parties in 1976 and became a Republican for three reasons. One, I realized the Democratic Party, at least the party, was way too liberal for me. Secondly, I believe that Gerald Ford deserved to be elected President of the United States. And thirdly, I didn't think that Jimmy Carter would be a good president, although I thought he was a nice guy. I think I might have been right on all three, quite frankly. And so I'm ahead of my time on a lot of things, and now I want to talk to you about the nation's finances. I'm going to tell you the truth, talk about the tough choices, and some of the potential solutions to solve our problem. Let me start with this. This is the preamble to the Constitution of the United States, the greatest political document in the history of mankind. The preamble was actually not written until after the Constitution was enacted, but it was written by the founders as a way to kind of help explain what they intended. If you look at the words that are bolded and underlined, you'll see that there are differences between those words as to the degree of responsibility for the federal government. Promote does not mean provide. Just check Webster's dictionary. The simple fact of the matter is that this country was also intended to recognize that states are sovereign entities. And it was intended to be that the federal government should only do those things where the powers weren't reserved to the states or the people. And you can see this. This is an amendment to the Constitution of the United States. And if you look at the framing of our country, you'll find that our country was founded on certain timeless principles and values. Look, things evolve. I believe in continuous improvement. I believe in evolution. But I also believe that there are certain principles and values that are so important that they are the foundation of progress and they are timeless in nature. And these are some of the ones that are relevant to my topic today. Limited but effective government. Individual liberty and opportunity. Personal responsibility and accountability. Fiscal responsibility and intergenerational equity and rule of law and equal justice under the law. Ladies and gentlemen, we're violating every one of those today to different degrees. America is a great country. Not as great as we think we are, but we're a great country. But we have strayed from the principles and values that made us great, and as a result, we face a range of key sustainability challenges that literally threaten our future economy, our future position in the world, our future standard of living at home, and the future domestic tranquility in our streets. We have to face reality. And we have a political process today that is dysfunctional. We have a republic that is not representative of or responsive to the public. And you'll hear more about that. In 1800, the federal government was 2% of the U.S. economy. Frankly, 200 years ago, or probably as recently as 1880, it was only 2.5% of the economy. Last year, it was 24% of the economy. It's headed to 37% of the economy on autopilot. If you add state and local government, government would be over 50% of the U.S. economy by 2040. Look, I'm not an anti-government person. There are a number of things that government needs to do that the private sector can't or shouldn't do. But the fact is that having spent 20 years in the private sector, 15 in government, 4 in the nonprofit sector, I also know that government is not the engine of growth, innovation, and job creation. This is not a prescription for prosperity. And in addition to the fact that government's gotten too big, it's grown too big, promised too much, waited too long to restructure, the composition of what government's doing has changed fundamentally. If you look 40 years ago, most of the budget was for defense, 42%. Now that's down to less than 20. If you look at 40 years ago, over 60% of the budget was decided by Congress every year, so-called discretionary spending. Last year, less than 40% of the budget was deemed to be discretionary, and it's being taken over by so-called entitlement programs. I don't like to call them that. I call them social insurance programs because they're not entitlements, according to the Supreme Court. But the fact is that we're spending more and more on consumption, more and more on seniors, more and more of our budget is on autopilot, less and less is being controlled, less and less for investment, less and less for young people. That is not only irresponsible, it is unethical, it is immoral, and it must stop. By the way, the discretionary spending, which is about 37% of federal spending, includes all of the express and enumerated responsibilities envisioned by the Founding Fathers for the federal government. 100%. So it's gotten bigger, the nature of what it's doing is different. That's to demonstrate. Here are federal revenues and outlays as a percentage of the economy. If it's red, it means the Republicans control the House and the Senate. If it's blue, it means the Democrats control the House and the Senate. If it's mixed, it means it was split. And if you have really good eyes, you can see who controls the White House. This is adjusted for inflation. The dotted line represents revenue. So if the solid's above the dotted, that's called a deficit. Guess what? Spending is a bipartisan problem. There's not a party of fiscal responsibility. There are people who are, just not enough of them. The fact of the matter is that we've been totally out of control in the last 11 years. And Congress has been controlled by both parties during that period of time. It's been split during part of the time. And we've had presidents of both political parties during the last 11 years. The last 11 years have been the most fiscally irresponsible in the history of the United States. And George W. Bush was the most fiscally irresponsible president until the current coming. And that is the problem. If we look from George Washington to William Jefferson Clinton, we accumulated $5.6 trillion in debt. We way more than doubled that since 2000, and we could double again in the next 10 years. And if we look through history, and if we count not just debt owed to the public, but the debt that we owe to Social Security and Medicare's trust funds, it's real, it's several $trillions, it's backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government, it's guaranteed as the principal interest. We will not default on it, which government doesn't want to count, by the way, but I do, and you should. They're duplicitous. They want to tell people you can count on this. On the other hand, we don't want to count the liability. I mean, we don't owe that right now. We owe that, kind of down the road because we're paying all this stuff on a cash flow basis. You will see that only one time in the history of the United States until now has debt been over 100% of GDP. That was World War II. Not to win our independence, not the War of 1812, not the Civil War, not World War I, only World War II. Well, frankly, we got something for World War II. We defeated the Axis powers. We saved the free world. We were over about 50% of the global economy after World War II. The dollar was as good as gold. That's not how it is today. Now we are over 100% of GDP when you count what we owe Social Security and Medicare, and we are adding debt at record rates. And how about interest in debt? This represents interest that we pay on debt, and the dollar and the solid black line represents the effective interest rate. Here's the truth. We have historically low interest rates. We have the lowest average maturity of any major sovereign nation on debt, which means we have huge interest rate risk. So when, not if, when interest rates turn around, for every 100 basis points, 1% increase in interest rates, that will cost the federal government $150 billion. And what do you get for interest? As we say in the South, shinola, nothing. Interest is what you pay for past excess consumption. It is the fastest growing expense in the federal government, and by President Obama's own budget projection, we will be paying nearly $1 trillion a year in interest in 10 years. And what do you get for that? Shinola. And the real problem is not today's deficits, $1.3 trillion, not today's debt, $15.5 trillion. the real problem is what you don't see. You know, this month is the 100th anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic. And the Titanic was sunk by an iceberg. Now, as you know, on an iceberg, you can see the ice that's above the water, but the real threat is what you don't see, which is multiple times greater below the waterline. Same thing for the government's finances. We can see the deficits and the debt, but what the real threat is the huge ice below the water that could literally sink the ship of state. $37 trillion in unfunded obligations for Medicare. $9 trillion in unfunded obligations for Social Security. A range of other commitments and contingencies that when aggregated with debt and pension and retiree health obligations, as of the end of last fiscal year, $65 trillion. Now, how do you relate to that number? Well, that's 200,000 plus for every man, woman, child in America, including newborn babies. No wonder newborn babies cry. That's over $500,000 for every household or taxpayer in America. Median household income in America is $50,000. So that means that the typical household has an implicit second or third mortgage equal to 11 times median household income and no house to back that mortgage. And by the way, the 65.5, because of a simple concept of math, the new four-letter word, and the power of compounding goes up 2 to 3 trillion a year for every year that we continue to do nothing. 2 to 3 trillion a year. Oh, by the way, that's with a balanced budget. Okay. And we're a long way from a balanced budget. If a household managed its finances like the U.S. government, this is what it would look like. Median household income, $50,000 a year. That's $966 a week. So you take in $966 a week, you're spending $1496 a week. That's a deficit of $536 a week with household debt of $314,000, and then when you really consider all the other commitments you've made, real debt of $1.3 million when your annual household income is $50,000. Would you want to be in that household? You can't run your family that way. We can't run businesses that way. We should not allow our country to be run this way. And when you compare us to other countries, and you use honest accounting, which typically is not used, then you must add total federal, state, and local debt as a percentage of the economy to compare to European nations, because they finance differently. And when you do that, you will find that we are already worse than Spain. We're already worse than other countries that are on the news. And then when you add what we owe Social Security and Medicare, which is the dark part in the United States, you'll see that we are within 2 years of where Greece was when they had their crisis. Now, we're not Greece. You know, they're a small country, small population, small GDP. We're the largest economy on earth, the temporary sole superpower. Our currency, the dollar, represents over 60% of the world's global reserve currency. So that means that we have more time, not unlimited time. It means that we're a safe haven from the temporary uncertainties in Europe, but not a permanent safe haven. We are not exempt from the laws of prudent finance. You cannot expend more money than you take in, indefinitely charge the credit card, and not expect a day of reckoning. And ours will come within the next 4 years. And so we must make sure that this is a top issue in the presidential election, so it can be a priority, so that we can start diffusing this ticking debt bomb, and that we can start making tough choices in 2013, like other countries have already done, so that we can make sure that we keep America great and that our future will be better than our past. And unlike at the end of World War II, when we had the highest debt in our history, we owed it all to Americans. Americans saved, they invested, they bought war bonds. And so therefore the interest stayed in our country. We were paying ourselves interest. But now, about half of our public debt is held by foreign lenders. That means those interest payments go overseas. It helps them, it doesn't help us. That means that they have more leverage on us on things like foreign policy and economic and trade issues and things of that nature. And by the way, who's the largest holder of U.S. debt? Anybody want to guess? Well, for countries, it's China, but you know the largest holder of our debt? The Federal Reserve. We're self-dealing in our own debt. We are buying our own debt in order to keep interest rates down, in order to stimulate economic growth, and in order to keep housing mortgage costs down and try to stabilize the housing market. You can do that short term. You can't do that forever. Ultimately, market forces will take over. So fiscal policy, which is tax and spend, monetary policy, which is money supply, are both improved and unsustainable right now. We're going to have to correct both, and we need to get on with them. Now, if you rank countries, the Comeback America Initiative, which I had, nonpartisan facts, nonpartisan solutions that can get bipartisan support, rank countries based on IMF data, International Monetary Fund, and number 1 in the world, Australia, for fiscal responsible and sustainability. Number 34, and we only rank 34, Greece. You can understand that. Where are we? An embarrassing 28. Down dramatically in the last 11 years. Below Spain, below Italy, in a bad neighborhood. We need to move on up. We need to move on up. And if you look at the fiscal future, the line represents revenues as a percentage of the economy. Inflation's taken out. The bars represent spending. The bars above the line, that's called a deficit, which adds to debt. Fastest growing expense, interest. And what do you get for interest? Shinola. Okay? Second fastest growing expense, healthcare. If there's one thing that can bankrupt America, it's healthcare. Do you know that we're the only major industrialized nation that doesn't have a budget for what it allocates to spend on healthcare at the government level? The only one. Nobody else has done enough to do that. Even countries that have socialized medicine cradle to grave, I'm not advocating that. Sweden has socialized medicine cradle to grave, and they have limits. States do. Oregon and others have limits. You can't write a blank check for health care. It'll bankrupt you. If you look at health care costs, we spend double per person, and we have higher infant mortality, lower life expectancy, higher hospital error rates, higher readmissions. So if you're wealthy, you have a good system, but from a societal standpoint, we're getting poor value for money. Is the answer to just throw more money at a system where you're spending double per person to get below average results? I don't think so. I think we need dramatic and fundamental reform. By the way, there's another system that we spend double per person and we get below average results. Anybody want to guess? Education. K through 12 education. Double per person, below average results. We need dramatic and fundamental reform focusing on incentives, transparency, and accountability. Those are the 3 most powerful forces. If we look at Social Security and Medicare, they're both already paying out more money than they're taking in. They have huge unfunded obligations. Do you realize that there are 10,000 Americans every day eligible for retirement? 10,000 a day? It's called a baby boom generation. And the federal budget is calculated on a cash basis. So when people retire, you not only have to start paying more benefits, you lose revenues because they're not working. And when you look at defense, as the Congressman mentioned, we spend as much as the next 15 nations combined on defense. And by the way, if you look at the list, most of them are allies. Now, in fairness, we're doing too much in this area. We're assuming too much of global security. Others aren't doing enough. We have the most powerful, the most effective, the most lethal military on the face of the earth. We have unparalleled weapon systems. But we're doing a lot of things based on past threats rather than current future threats. The Pentagon is a bloated bureaucracy, and they're going to have to restructure their pension and health obligations too. And if we look at infrastructure, we're now number 17 in the world in infrastructure, and infrastructure is key to improving economic growth and our competitive posture. And if you look at taxes, most of our revenues come from individuals, either payroll taxes or through income taxes. And we do have a progressive tax system. The truth is that the wealthy pay a very high percentage of total payroll and income tax. And you can see here with the percentages, I think it's the top 1% have 17% of income, pay 23% of all taxes. Now we can debate whether it's progressive enough, but it is progressive, and that counts both. We count income, payroll, and estate. But by the way, I don't see the graphic. I'll tell you, we got 2 problems. Depending on the year, between 40 and 50% of Americans pay no income tax. Zippo. And a significant percentage get rebates through the earned income tax credit. Let me state that differently. We have almost as many people on the wagon as pulling the wagon. That's a dangerous disconnect in a democracy. Clearly below a certain level, the poverty level or whatever, that's understandable. But once you get to a certain level of income, you need to pay something. And obviously we need a progressive tax structure up to a reasonable limit. At the same point in time, the Buffett problem, the very wealthy people have a lower effective tax rate than middle-income people. Why? Because the most wealthy people make their money based upon capital gains and dividends. And they're taxed at 15%. So you have to address both of those issues. You have to get more people paying, and you have to end up dealing with the effective tax rate. How you do that matters, and I'm happy to get into that in the Q&A. And we lose $1 trillion a year in revenues and deductions, exemptions, credits, and exclusions. This is backdoor spending. It's not subject to the budget. It's not in the financial statements. It's not appropriated. It's not authorized, and it's not re-examined. It ought to be treated, these ought to be treated just the same as direct spending. They're just spending by another name. I'm sorry, here's the point that I was trying to make. These are the effective tax rates by income level. And you can see in the first three areas, people get rebates. And at the top, the median effective income tax rate for people making over $1 million a year. For the record, I'm not in that category. Somebody needs to fix this flag. That's not acceptable. Thank you. Is 18.9%. How can that be when the top marginal tax rate is 35%? Because of what I told you. And what about states? Bad news flows downhill. The federal government's promised too much, going to have to restructure. It's going to spend less, and it's going to ask for more revenue. And states rely upon the federal government for 33 to 42% of the revenues, and localities rely upon states. So when the restructuring comes, bad news flows downhill. And states and localities have their own problems, in many cases driven by off-balance sheet obligations, underfunded pensions, unfunded retiree health obligations, etc. And when you add those for the states, the best state in the union is Wyoming. The worst state in the union, unfortunately, I live in, Connecticut. And I think you're number 39. You're number 39. So you're not worse, but you're well below average. We need to restructure at all levels of government. And when we restructure, we have to recognize a reality. These are four big myths. We can grow our way out. Bull. It would take double-digit real GDP growth for decades to grow out of a $65.5 trillion hole. Yes, we want more growth. We want pro-growth policies. We can't come close to where we're at. Second, we can inflate our way out. Well, with this inflation, we're paying back the debt below. You can't inflate your way out because the problem's the off-balance sheet obligations that grow faster than inflation and faster than the economy when the economy grows. We can tax our way out. We would have to double all federal taxes on young people in order to solve this problem. That's not equitable, it's not acceptable, it's not moral, it's not ethical. Fourthly, we can cut our way out. We would have to shred the social safety net, compromise other basic elements of federal responsibility, including national security. So we've got to put everything on the table. Everything's got to be, in my view, 3-part spending reduction, excluding interest, 1 part revenue. But how you achieve that matters. And when you achieve that matters. So let's look forward. These are the systemic challenges of government at all levels. You can read as well as I can, but these don't have boundaries. They don't have boundaries between levels of government or across the world. Washington uses words that don't mean the same thing as Webster's dictionary. You wonder why government's got a credibility problem? When they say cut, they mean reduce the rate of increase, not cut. When they say trust funds, you can't trust them. They're not funded. We're going to have to reimpose tough budget controls. We need to recapture budget flexibility. We need every area of the federal budget to be subject to an annual spending limit other than 2. Number 1, Social Security. We can reform it, make the numbers work. We don't have to have an annual limit because we can control it because it's a math exercise. And second, interest on the debt, because you can't. You got to pay what you got to pay. And by the way, that's where we have huge risk. By the way, we will never default on our debt. Why? The 14th Amendment to the Constitution, would only guarantees two things. It guarantees bondholders and it guarantees military pensions. Nothing else. Social Security is not guaranteed, Medicare, Medicaid, nothing else is guaranteed, and the Supreme Court has already ruled on that. So we won't, all right? But the fact of the matter is we don't want to have to be in a position of deciding which bills we're going to pay and which ones we're not going to pay. That would send a terrible message to the markets and will further undermine confidence in our ability to manage it. Social Security, I'll answer questions. We need to make it solvent, sustainable, secure, more savings-oriented. Focused more on the younger you are, the better off you are financially, the more you're going to be affected. Young people will get Social Security. Seniors will not be taken advantage of. I'm happy to answer questions. Medicare, Medicaid, and health care. We've got to be honest. We way overpromised on health care. The Affordable Care Act is not sustainable, no matter what the Supreme Court decides. Let me give you an analogy of where our situation was before it was passed. If our health care system was a house, it was structurally unsound, mortgaged for more than it's worth, and headed for foreclosure. So what did the government do? Rather than ensuring the structural integrity, make sure we can make the mortgage payments, over time, it added a new wing on the house. Promised 32 million more people benefits. Asserted that it was paid for, whereas the chief actuary of Medicare said it wasn't even close to paid for, and called that progress. Look, we need universal health care, but it needs to be appropriate, affordable, and sustainable. Basic and essential, catastrophic, delivered through competition in the private sector, subject to an annual limit. I'm happy to get to more Q&A on that if you want. Defense and other spending. We must cut defense spending and constrain it while maintaining a minimum level, because it is a national security assured minimum level. In other words, it won't go below a certain amount. Could be more, depending upon threats, but it's less than it is now. We can do that without compromising national security. I was on the Defense Business Board for 8 years. Defense departments are bloated bureaucracy. There are ways to do it. Comprehensive tax reform. Simpler, fairer, more competitive, more equitable, and generate enough revenues to pay our bills and deliver on the promises we intend to keep. That means broader base, lower rates. That means providing deductions for corporations for dividends distributed. That means a territorial system of taxation. And I'm happy to get into specific examples about what the rates ought to be, what deductions and exemptions ought to be retained, which ones shouldn't be retained, etc. And constitutional amendments. We need constitutional amendments to deal with our finances, and we need constitutional amendments to deal with our political system. And I'm happy to get into Q&A on that. When you're passing legislation, these are the 6 tests. This is a best solutions test. If you pass all 6, it's a best solution. If you don't, it's BS. And that doesn't stand for best solution. Do they make economic sense? Are they pro-growth? Are they socially equitable? Do they recognize that we need a solvent, sustainable, and secure social safety net in this country? Are they culturally acceptable? Americans will not accept the size of government or level of taxation of Europe. Do they pass a math test? This is the new 4-letter word. If you're trying to balance the budget, if you're trying to stabilize debt to GDP, which is what I think the target ought to be, stabilize debt to GDP at a reasonable and sustainable level below where we are now, then do you have a plan that works, reasonable assumptions, and that the math works? Are they politically feasible? Can you pass the House? Can you get 60 votes in the Senate? And can you get a presidential signature? And last but not least, can you get bipartisan support? Because if you can't get meaningful bipartisan support, it will not be sustained. The Affordable Care Act was passed on a straight party line vote. It will not be sustained. The Ryan budget was passed on a straight party line vote. It won't be enacted by the Senate. That's all show. That's politics, not progress. And these are the things that we have to start asking ourselves. You realize the U.S. government is the largest, the most important entity on the face of the earth. It's been in existence since 1789, and it doesn't have 3 things that you have to achieve sustainable success. Number 1, a plan. There's no plan. I mean, I don't believe rushing into things, but 1789? Secondly, it's got no budget. It hadn't had a budget in 3 years. And even when it has a budget, it only controls less than 40% of expenses. And thirdly, it's got no metrics. It's got no metrics that help to say, are we succeeding? Are we failing? Are we making progress? How do we compare? It's 0 for 3. Ladies and gentlemen, in early April, that's a strikeout. And it's no wonder that we have problems. We've got to deal with these 4 issues. This is what Ross Perot ran on 20 years ago. Fiscal irresponsibility, political dysfunctionality, lack of trust in government, declining confidence in our future. We are demonstrably worse off on all 4. 20 years ago, 22% of Americans were independents, 42 are today. I've been one for 17 years. 20 years ago, 58% of Americans had confidence in government. Today, 20% have confidence in government. These are the numbers on debt to GDP. Ross Perot didn't win a single electoral vote, but he woke up America. He helped set President Clinton's agenda. We made great progress from 1993 to 2000. All the budget controls expired in 2002, and you can see what the heck has happened after that. So go to these websites. Take 10 minutes. Take the fiscal IQ quiz. 30 questions, true, false, agree, disagree. Find out what you know. Find out what you don't know. Find out whether or not you're part of the solution or part of the problem. FiscalIQ.net. Go to our website, either tcai.org, or we just changed the name of it yesterday. You can get there through that, keepingamericagreat.org. Check out No Labels, which is a new political movement for Democrats, Republicans, and Independents who want to value progress over partisanship and results over rhetoric. And check out AmericansElect.org, which will field, for the first time, a unity ticket, meaning they can't be the same political party, for President and Vice President this year, to be determined by the end of June. In summary, we're a great country, but not as great as we think we are. We've got serious problems. We need to get on with solving the problems. The 3 biggest deficits we have are truth, leadership, and solutions. 2012 is incredibly important. You need to hold elected officials responsible and accountable for what is their plan to solve this problem. Because if we solve this problem, our future can be better than our past. If we don't, our best years are behind us. And a clock is ticking, time is not working in our favor. And the other good news is, Americans typically rise to the challenge, hopefully before we have a crisis. We've done it in the past, hopefully we'll do it this time. If Sweden, if New Zealand, if Australia can do it, we can do it. Let's get on with it. But the 2 groups that need to be much more involved, business and young people, largely AWOL. It's time to come to the front lines. This is the future of our country, the future of our families. I'll do my part. All that I ask is that you do yours. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Okay. We've got just a couple minutes for just a couple of questions. Thank you, first of all, for a very enlightening conversation here. So a lot to take in a short period of time. First question is really talks about what do you propose to solve the Social Security problem?
All right, Social Security. I want you to listen carefully because I'm going to ask for a show of hands. The sooner we act, the more people can be put in a whole harmless position. The age is going to be 55 to 60, depending upon how quickly we act. Here's the deal. If you're 55 to 60, then little to no changes, because you don't have time to make adjustments. The younger you are, the better off you are financially, the more you're going to be affected. You have more time to adjust and more financial ability to deal with it. We have to increase the replacement rate for people near the poverty level because too many Americans rely solely on Social Security for their retirement income. We need to have a mean-tested supplement for people over 85, means-tested, because too many people are outliving their retirement savings. We need to maintain a benefit for middle and upper income, but somewhat less of a replacement rate than right now. So somewhat more means-tested, but not fully means-tested. We don't want this to be a welfare program. We need to increase the normal retirement age and the early retirement age 2 to 3 years, phased in prospectively over 20 to 30 years. We need to look at how we calculate inflation for seniors because it's different than it is for other segments of the population. If you do those things, you can solve the problem, but to get a political deal, you're going to have some revenues on the table. Rather than increasing the tax rate, which is regressive, increase but do not eliminate the taxable wage-based cap from about $110,000 to about $150,000, but do not eliminate it. If you do that, it's solvent, sustainable, secure forever. Forever. And every generation gets more than they think they're going to get. Young people think they get nothing. Shinola, they're wrong. Seniors think they're going to get taken advantage of. I could use other words, but I won't. They're not. And on top of the solvent, sustainable, secure, base defined benefit program, you add a supplemental savings account, 2 to 3% of pay. Payroll deduction goes into a real trust fund with real investments, with real fiduciary responsibility and liabilities that would help to increase our savings rate, help people understand the miracle of compounding, that would give them a pre-retirement death benefit, a supplemental retirement benefit, and something to leave to their heirs. Now, how many of you believe, that's not perfect, but that is a reasoned and reasonable framework for Social Security reform? Please raise your hands high. How many people don't? Please raise your hands high. One. I have gone to 49 states, and I've always had 95% plus. So what's the problem? No leadership. The Democrats are in denial about the need to renegotiate the social insurance contract. The Republicans are in denial that we're going to have some revenues. So where do we go? Nowhere.
Well, that last question would come into how can we change that in terms of where will we get the leadership to address the debt and these unfunded liabilities with these entitlements which are so difficult to address?
Okay.
And we'll make that our last question.
Short-term and structural. Short-term, two things have to happen. The first three words of the Constitution have to come alive. We the people. They're the most powerful. They're the most important. So that's why this election is so important. Educate and engage the public. Disproportionate responsibility upon business and community leaders and young people. Secondly, the President of the United States, whoever that is, whether it's Barack Obama in the second term, Mitt Romney or somebody else in their first term, they're going to have to make this a priority. They're going to have to commit to use the bully pulpit to go directly to the people with the facts, the truth, the tough choices, why we have to act sooner rather than later, the consequences if we don't, the benefits of doing so, lay out a framework, employ a unity approach. They need a unity of cabinet, and they need to make sure that the public brings pressure on the Congress, which is a dysfunctional body, and a committee, and you cannot run a country by committee. Pressure on the Congress to act in the public interest rather than their personal or political interests. There are always exceptions. On the structural, we need redistricting reform. We need to maximize the number of competitive districts consistent with the Voting Rights Act, not minimize the number of competitive districts. We need integrated and open primaries, no Republican primaries, no Democratic primaries. You pull it together, you have one primary, the top two vote getters run off in the general. The parties can endorse candidates, they can raise money for candidates, they can provide ground troops. We got to get a lot more people voting in primaries. We need to recognize that 42% increasing of the population are independents. We need to empower the sensible center. This is a center-right country. That's where the solutions are. That's not where our politics are. They're right, they're left, and the sensible center is largely unrepresented. We need campaign finance reform and term limits. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, not just for outlining the problems, but most importantly for outlining solutions. I strongly encourage you to go to the website. You can find it very useful. I want to thank each one of you for coming. As he mentioned, I know it's spring break and it's springtime, but this is a very, very important issue to our country. I appreciate you coming. This is kind of the first step, though. You got informed, you need to follow up. You need to really encourage your other family members, your friends, and your other employees to get educated, to get informed about this issue. We'll work to give you other websites. We'd like to make sure from a Grand Rapids business community standpoint, we'll give you alternatives. He has an excellent website with lots of solutions, but we'll look to give you some other ideas for other people to look at and listen to look at these unfunded liabilities, to understand how we can deal with them and how we can move forward. So thank you very much. Have a great day.